You know what's kind of odd is we've had hundreds of Superman figures over the years, and barely any of them seem like they're having a good time. Almost all of them are stern and serious. Where's some smiling Supermans? Okay, maybe there's a reason they don't always do smiling Superman. It's morphin' time! On today's video, we're talking about the history of Superman action figures by going over his figure evolution from 1978 to today. This is going to be a video covering 30 examples of Superman figure evolution, because we talked about every single Superman figure. We'd be here for like, I don't know, 4.5 weeks, and we would mostly be repeating a lot of things. So I picked out 30 significant moments in Superman action figure history to talk about, both figures I have and figures I don't. So it should be a pretty good time. Now, I'm doing the same format on a lesser scale, because there's less figures of them, for Mr. Terrific, Metamorpho, Hawkgirl, and Guy Gardner, since they're in the Superman movie, and you go check those out. They're going to be in the YouTube Shorts section on the channel. Those are going to be fun to have as a companion piece. But we're got more time for Superman, because there's a lot more Supermans to talk about. And if you enjoy this type of video, hit the like button, hit subscribe and the notification bell. Let me know you want to see more action figure evolution type videos and other things on Superman. So let's get into it. We've got 30 examples of Superman figures starting all the way back at 1978 to the present day. Alright, so let's start at the beginning with the 1978 release of the Mego Superman in the original World's Greatest Superheroes line, I think it was called. This was, Mego was essentially like the first action figures, and so of course Superman was a part of that. Makes a lot of sense. There was a lot of DC and Marvel characters made by Mego in this era, and it's pretty iconic, pretty classic. You've got kind of, what you would expect from a Superman figure done by Mego. It's been redone, it's been homaged, it's been modified several times since. But yeah, the original classic, always a good one. We next jump forward to 1984 with the Superpowers Superman. And this is when action figures started to transition from variations on dolls to kind of their own thing. And in the 80s, this was a very, common occurrence. The Superpowers one, also, the line in general had these spring-loaded action features. So you'd squeeze his legs and he'd punch, which is really, really cool. They've done, modern versions of this. McFarlane has a whole Superpowers line that has, kind of like the modern style where they don't have the action features. But this original classic one, you really can't go wrong with it. It's a good, iconic original Superman. Now, our next major Superman would be 1995's Kenner Superman Man of Steel line. This was a comic-based line that came out post-Death and Return of Superman, so this is a more of a mullet look on Superman, which is a first. You can see it, we've kind of gone into the 90s style of action figures where we have, at equal times, less realistic proportions and more realistic proportions than 80s toys. This is a pretty cool, looking Superman overall, and they started to include some more gimmicks with him, like you can see the chains there. There's a ton of Supermans in this line, and it's actually pretty fun to kind of look back at where we started. In 1996, we got the Superman the Animated Series toy line, and one of those figures was Quick Change Superman. This was kind of the basic animated line Superman, and it was also a cool gimmick figure. I actually have a variation of this that I got as a kid. It was a later release. I can't figure out where I put it. But this basically, you have Superman, and then you have parts to clip on top of him, which is just like a torso and pants, basically, to make him Clark Kent. And so basically, the gimmick is that you pop off the Clark Kent parts and then he's Superman. It was kind of interesting because we had a lot of Bruce Waynes to Batmans by this point, especially from Kenner, where you'd have like a Bruce Wayne figure you could put Batman stuff onto. And this is kind of the inverse, right? It's a Superman figure that you put Clark Kent parts onto, which I think is really, really fun. It's really cool. It's a really great idea. It spawned the line of the Superman Animated Series line, which didn't last as long as the Batman one, which is kind of a bummer because they didn't make most of the characters, in the line. It was very limited, but this Superman is, I think, really iconic and kind of a fun version of that quick change action feature that they've done with Batman so many times. So rolling around to 1998, DC Direct starts making more collector-based figures. Now, DC Direct stuff, for the longest time, did not have that much articulation. They were more focused on sculpt over posability. And yeah, this was kind of like where we started getting more collector-geared action figures. The market had already started to shift to where kids' toys are still the prominent thing, but collector's toys were starting to become a thing. And DC Direct specifically was a company owned by DC themselves. That's why they were called DC Direct. And they were selling to the direct market, which was comic book shops and other specialty retailers. So it's not stuff you'd find like in normal like retail like Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, KB Toys. Man, talking about 1998 means I have more options of stores to mention. But yeah, basically DC Direct was direct to consumer and it was direct to fans, and so that made for a lot better of sort of figures for adult collectors that didn't have to do anything for kids. And that is the first Superman from DC Direct, far as I can tell. Now, in 2001, DC Direct did something really, really cool, which is the Superman and Lois Lane box set. And here it is-ish. I don't actually have the Superman it originally came with. This is a later Silver Age Superman release from DC Direct, one that actually has a semblance of a smile, even though if it's a little weird. But basically, kind of similar built figure. But the important part here is that we have one of the only Lois Lane action figures. There are barely any figures of Lois from any, media version or any comic book version. But specifically, yeah, this is one of the only Lois Lanes. This one is very, they say Silver Age, very Silver Age, of course. It's really cool. You got like, kind of like her pad here where she's written, "Is Clark Kent Superman?" which kind of goes in with that. You have a pencil. It's all molded into her hands, which is really, really nice. This is the Lois on my shelf because there really isn't any others in this size and scale, which is a real bummer. We barely have any Lois Lanes. DC Direct did do Perry White and Jimmy Olsen as well in the same era, so I have like a kind of a nice little like Silver Age Daily Planet display. But otherwise, there's like basically no other figures of Lois. So I thought this was like less significant because of the evolution of Superman, but more significant because it's one of the only times we've gotten Lois in a larger size. So in 2003, Mattel had this really cool Batman line, and it was the first time they were kind of transitioning away from more of the kid-focused figures into more adult collector figures that could be good for kids. These were 6-inch size, they had more detailed sculpts. I really liked the Batman 2003 line, mostly because I'm a little bit nostalgic for it. When I was 8 when it came out, and that was like the perfect time to be kind of going for something a little bit older. The important part here for our video topic is that there was a Batman and Superman 2-pack, and that was the only non-Batman character in the line was Superman in the 2-pack. I never got this. I don't remember why I didn't get it. I think maybe because I was more into Batman at the time than Superman. But this was kind of a significant thing because Mattel had only really been doing Batman up to that point. They'd done stuff for New Adventures of Batman because they got the license from Hasbro Kenner, and so then they were like doing New Adventures of Batman, and then they had started. They only were just going to get into Justice League a little bit after this because they started Justice League's toy line late. So this was like our first, like, Mattel has the license for Batman. Now they're starting to branch out into other things with Superman. And speaking of Justice League, in 2003, the Mattel Justice League line started, which this line ran from like 2003 to 2012, 2013, I think, or maybe even further than that. They made every single, like, Justice League member from regular and unlimited. And they made so many figures in this line, they even did comic characters in this Justice League style. For the topic of the video, of course, we have Superman. Now, the first release of Superman was basically a 5 points articulation figure, very animation accurate. That's what I love about the JLU line. And they did several versions later. There was one that was more articulated, but really fragile because they added more joints and they break easily. But this initial set was really cool because each main Justice League member came with a stand, and they would all connect together to make like a connecting stand of the logo, and that was really, really awesome. There was like, I would say like dozens of variants of this figure over the years, but this was the first, and that was like the first step into an animated Superman style. Now in 2006, Mattel's license expanded for their figures, and they got to do the DC Superheroes line. And so Superman, of course, was part of that. And the way that this line worked is that the first wave was Batman, second wave was Superman, and then they would alternate for the most part, but basically it was only Batman and Superman characters were allowed, outside of course, the Justice League line was based on the cartoon, but for comic-wise, they had the license for Batman and Superman, and so they would alternate between waves. And so this Superman was a little bit different than the 2003 Batman line Superman. It wasn't a reused mold, even though a bunch of figures in this line were reused from the Batman 2003 line. This Superman was new and was the basis for every variant of Superman in the DC Superheroes line, which is pretty awesome. And, it was 2006, and that was kind of helping the line exist because of another event that happened that year. And that was the release of Superman Returns. And this was the first time we got any Supermans based on movies. There had been no figures of the Christopher Reeve Superman, and there hadn't been any others. So Brandon Routh Superman got a bunch of toys in the Superman Returns toy line, and that was kind of an evolution step for Mattel, not just expanding their license to include Superman, but also to kind of go into let's do stuff based on current media. And that's pretty awesome as well. It was a big year for Superman. They were really giving it the push that they gave Batman Begins the year prior, and definitely was a really cool thing to see a whole Superman toy line like that. If only the movie had done better and was better, it may have spawned into other things. So moving on to 2007, the Batman animated series on Kids WB, known as The Batman, did have a two-part episode featuring Superman that was called The Batman Superman Story, and so they put a Superman figure into the Shadow Tech line. This was like 2006, 2007. I'm not exactly sure what year this came out because some of the dates online conflict. But basically, this was a basic Superman figure. He didn't have really anything special about him. It was the first of the Justice League members because later on into the 5th season of the show, they started having more Justice League members appear, and they all got toys in the Shadow Tech line. The weird thing was that like the Batman characters came with like gimmicks or like special weapons, but the Justice League members just were basic action figures, which for collectors kind of works out. For kids, kind of boring. But the Superman was a nice addition to the lineup, representing that character. So in 2008, Mattel launched DC Universe Classics, which was their expansion from the comic license being only Batman and Superman to the entire DC Universe. And DC Universe Classics is a very important line for a lot of reasons, but for a personal level, one of my favorite toy lines ever. Now you think this Superman with the traditional look would have been the first one they made. Actually, it wasn't. The first Superman in DC Classics was the electric blue and electric red Superman. And that's the thing that a lot of people look back on DC Classics and they're like, oh, the character lineups are so weird. Why is, there's a Batman in Wave 1, why is the Superman in Wave 2 the 90s electric blue, electric red time frame versions? The blue was the standard and the red was a variant. Funny how we're dealing with chase variants yet again with DC, but the interesting part was the reason they did this is, like I just mentioned, they had done DC superheroes, and there had been a ton of Supermans in that, so they decided to do something different for fans. Much like how the Wave 1 Batman is a more classic Batman, whereas the DC superheroes ones were more modern. And so it's kind of good context to remember that there was that previous line because they were building off of that. That being said, of course, they did make a classic Superman later. Here's a fun fact. Do you know where this classic one debuted? A lot of people point to Wave 6, but that was actually the mullet version, which is cool, but it wasn't the classic look. This classic one actually debuted in a 2-pack with He-Man exclusive to Comic-Con and Toys R Us. So that was in 2009, and then later they just repacked this guy so many times after that. They repainted him a few different times. But the classic look actually, from what I can tell, debuted in the He-Man 2-pack, which is kind of wild, but that's basically where this Superman came from. Now in 2010, Superman appeared in Batman the Brave and the Bold, and he was released in the Total Armor 3-pack with a Batman and a big old figure of Metallo. Now this was the only way that this Superman was released in the Brave and the Bold toy line, though the mold would get reused for a later reissue type repaint line that was more New 52 inspired. But focusing on the Brave and the Bold part of it, you can kind of notice there's a trend that we didn't have any Superman cartoons during the 2000s, so he's thrown into the Batman 2003 line, he's thrown into the Batman toy line, now he's in the Brave and the Bold toy line. And that was because the current Superman show at the time was Smallville, so there wasn't really like any more animated Superman appearances besides guest starring in Batman shows. Interesting though that he did not get a single pack, he was only in this multi-pack. As part of the final wave of DC Universe Classics, in 2012 we had the New 52 Superman, which was like the first major New 52 Superman, but also was a signifier of the end of the DC Universe Classics line. It would later be relaunched as DC Unlimited, and there was some subscription service figures that continued the classic stuff, but the main line became New 52 focused with this figure, and so I think that's a significant part of the evolution. I believe DC Direct also had their New 52 Superman out. I don't remember if it was out before or after this, but this was kind of a significant shift in the direction of the line. Where classics had been classic, they were, I think, instructed by Warner Brothers to make everything New 52 at retail, and then everything classic was going to be online, and that's pretty much how it went, which was kind of a bummer. It was kind of like the end of an era, but it was like Wave 20. It had a long life. You include DC superheroes, it was like 29 ways. You include the spin-offs like Green Lantern Classics. You were like 30, 35 ways of figures under one line, which is really incredible. But yeah, this was kind of the end of it and the beginning of the next thing, and that was kind of interesting. They even reissued the Superman into the DC Unlimited line, so that way it had kind of its moment to be the signifier of the end and the beginning. All right, in 2013, for the release of Man of Steel, there was not only a bunch of basic Superman figures, but there was the Movie Masters Superman. I have this figure, but I haven't had it on the shelf in many years, so I can't remember what box it's in. It's one of the things I need to work on to make these videos better, is to have my figures more easily accessible. But in this case, it's a great Superman figure. It's, the same articulation scheme you expect from DC Universe Classics. It's scaled to the Dark Knight Movie Masters figures and the Green Lantern Movie Masters, so they kind of all work together as, like, the movie subline of Mattel's DC Classics. And this would be the first of dozens of Henry Cavill Supermans. We've seen so many of them over the years, and this was one of the first. This was the first collector-aimed one, and I think that's what makes it a significant part in the history. All right, in 2014, we got the Justice League Gods and Monsters Superman. Now, this is the first animated-style Superman for a collector market, because DC Direct had been doing a Batman the Animated Series line, which McFarlane Toys has been reissuing and reprinting recently, and they were basic collector figures that were more articulated, but they were animation accurate to the DCAU art style for Batman the Animated Series, New Batman Adventures, and people have been wondering if it was going to expand out. Well, to tie into the Gods and Monsters movie that came out, they did do 3 figures, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, but of course we're talking about Superman. And this was a pretty good figure. It's pretty solid. It's like the only action figure of this design of Superman from this alternate universe story. They did actually go and do the Superman Animated Series one in a 2-pack with Lois Lane, and then they did a Justice League one that was modified off of that. And that was pretty much it. The only other Superman figures we got was there was a 5-pack that contained Livewire and Supergirl. They didn't do a whole line for Superman the Animated Series, which was a big bummer for me. But yeah, this was actually, the Gods and Monsters one is the first animated style Superman aimed at the collector market. For years, fans had wanted a Christopher Reeve Superman action figure, and NECA was actually the first ones to do it. Now, NECA did not have a DC license for 7-inch figures. They only had a license for quarter-scale figures. But what they did is they made 7-inch versions of those quarter-scale figures, sold exclusively at Toys R Us if you purchased home video releases. Like, you had to buy DC movies to get this as a bonus. You couldn't just straight up buy it. It was a little confusing, but it was the way to get around the license. But they produced a pretty nice looking Christopher Reeve Superman. It's definitely sculpt over articulation, like a lot of NECA figures were, but it was the first time we had gotten a Christopher Reeve Superman in a standard action figure size. Mattel had made one that was like Barbie doll size, but this was like our first like standard size Christopher Reeve Superman. And honestly, it's a pretty solid figure, I think, overall. It has, I think, the best likeness we've seen on a Christopher Reeve Superman, which I really do like. But yeah, it's a pretty nice figure. McFarlane has come around and done their version of Christopher Reeve Superman, and I think that while I do like the extra articulation and accessories that the McFarlane one comes with, I think the NECA one overall is more accurate sculpt-wise, more accurate likeness-wise, and kind of just a better accuracy figure, whereas this is a more fun action figure. Now, also in 2014, the DC line had shrunk at Mattel from the 6-inch figures we used to get to 4-inch ones, and that's where we got our Christopher Reeve Superman from Mattel. It's a bummer they didn't get to do this during the larger scale, so he could have fit alongside other figures. They had Adam West Batman and other stuff that this didn't fit with. It was in the new, smaller scale. They did make Superman and General Zod, which was nice, but the bummer part about it is that it was in the smaller scale instead of the larger size that we had expected from Mattel. That being said, it was a decent little figure for what it was. In 2015, we got the SH Figuarts Injustice Superman. Now, the Injustice line for SH Figuarts ultimately only ended up being a few figures. It was Batman, Joker, Superman, and Harley. And the thing was, I got this guy on sale. And the reason I got him was because we didn't have like a Japanese import, like high-end articulated Superman before. Fortunately, it was the evil Superman from Injustice and not like a normal Superman. But this is a significant step forward. It's the first time SH Figuarts did Superman. And yeah, it's, it's a thing. I think it hasn't aged super well with the way the cape is done with its like segmented plastic stuff. That was just the way Figuarts did it. It's also kind of not the best suit design either because it's the Injustice Superman suit design, specifically the evil one. But, at the time it was like, people were into the Injustice hype. I was into the Injustice hype. And yeah, it was kind of a cool figure to get. It wasn't as cool as the Batman. I thought the Batman was amazing. But the Superman was not as good. But it was a significant step forward in terms of, is Superman going to get figures that are made by other companies that can be higher articulated and higher accessory counts? So in 2016, DC Direct started a new line called DC Icons, and of course they released a Superman in it, which actually came with Helix, the robot from Fortress of Solitude, which was really cool. DC Icons were really neat because they had a bunch of accessories, and they were at a smaller scale than DC Direct had normally done. They had been doing kind of 7-inch figures, whereas these were more Marvel Legends size, which was kind of neat. I don't own the Superman, but I do have several of these. One of my favorite is the Mr. Miracle, because this is the only New 52 era Mr. Miracle we have. But this was a really cool line because they had been kind of decided to push the articulation. You know, you got double jointed elbows and knees, which is something DC Direct hadn't done. We had rocker ankles. We had like a segmented ab crunch with an upper torso ball joint, which is really funny because Marvel Legends is doing this more nowadays when people were like, oh, why isn't it just a normal ab crunch? Well, you know, there's extra range, you know, in theory. But yeah, they came with a bunch of accessories. They were really awesome. The line lasted a few ways, and then it got unceremoniously killed off. And it was really sad because I think like the last wave they canceled had like an Etrigan the Demon in it I really wanted. But the cool part about the line was that they were smaller. They were meant to go alongside like Marvel Legends size 6-inch figures. And, you know, it was really cool. It was a really cool step forward. And then, yeah, it died. And it was kind of a shame, and I didn't end up having the Superman, but based on the body mold of the Mr. Miracle, would have been a really great figure at the time. Also in 2016, the Justice League Action series premiered unceremoniously on Cartoon Network and then was never officially canceled. They just didn't order a second season, and even the people working on it were like, we never got a cancellation notice. Real bummer, because Justice League Action was great. Bought all the figures for it. They're all in a box. Can't find the box. Superman here is part of that. He was animation accurate. And overall, I thought, like, you know, it was a pretty solid figure. I think it was really cool the way they kind of went back and did the accessories are the gimmick, so that way the figure could be better, and I really, really appreciated that. Really cool line, also cut short, also got canceled, but was really awesome for the time. In 2017, Mezco's 1/12 line released their first Superman, which looked all right. It was, you know, early Mezco days. They hadn't quite got their formula down yet, like they did for the later one, which is the Man of Steel edition, the classic Superman. This is the one I have. One of my favorite Superman figures of all time, not just because the cloth bodysuit looks nice and I think the cape hangs well. He had so many accessories. I kind of just have him with this punching effect at the moment. He came with multiple heads, light up eyes for the heat vision blasts, crazy like Silver Age gadgets. You know, he came with like Bottle City of Kandor and stuff. Like a really, really cool loadout that I've never really seen on another Superman figure. Really love this figure. But yeah, this isn't the original Mezco one. This is one later, but this is my Mezco Superman. And I just wanted to use him as the example. But yeah, the original one looked, you know, pretty all right, but I think they definitely improved by the time they made the Man of Steel edition one that I have. So after the cancellation of DC Icons, DC Direct came back with DC Essentials in 2018. These were now larger than their old figures. They're like 7.5 inches tall. They were more articulated. They had like thigh swivel cuts. They had the, you know, kind of standard ab crunch. It's not as good. The double joint knees, double joint elbows, all that. But the fun part is that like all these figures were molded in clear plastic and then painted over, at least all the ones I had, which meant they had the loosest joints, they were kind of crap, and they didn't even have any accessories for the most part. Not a great line. I only own a couple of them because I think like the Brainiac was like the only version of that Brainiac design. But the whole idea with Essentials was just a complete mess, but it technically is an evolution step forward. I would call it an evolution step backward, though, on figure quality. Now, around the same time, Mattel redid their DC Multiverse line, which was the way their new DC line had gone, and we got the DC Multiverse Rebirth Superman. And this was Mattel trying to do the same thing that DC Direct was doing, which was bump up the articulation. So we got, you know, kind of more universal hips, we got double joint knees, no side-to-side ankle, only single jointed elbows, so it was kind of a wasted effort in some ways. The scale was a little bit taller, so while the figures work together, they're a little off from the DC Classic scale. I think it's just like they added knee joints. There was some really, really cool figures in this line. The Superman's not one of them. I don't really like this one that much, but this was Mattel trying to push the articulation range on their figures. It didn't really work well. It didn't work the way that like the Masters of the Universe Masterverse line bumped its articulation up. This was just kind of like, it made everybody a little weird. Some later figures were amazing though, and it's just not this one. So in 2018, 2019, Mattel lost their DC license that they had held for basically 20 years at that point, and McFarlane Toys took over, and that's where we got the McFarlane Toys Action Comics 1000 Superman, which was in the first wave of the line. It was their first Superman, and sculpt-wise, still my favorite. The articulation cuts were definitely going to get improved on. You can kind of see how it's got kind of like this weird, like, overlapping torso. The single-jointed elbows that almost have no movement was kind of a bummer, and the knees look really weird when you bend them. But he came with a flight stand. He had, like, you know, kind of the classic look to him. I like the molded-in emblem. It was a good start to the McFarlane line. McFarlane Toys has done, like, dozens of Supermans since. But this is kind of like the first one. You also may notice I have trouble getting him to stand. Don't know what's up with that. Maybe because he's been sitting in a box, but he's been kind of rickety. Overall, like, you know, this was the start of McFarlane's era for Superman and for DC in general, and it's pretty cool. And now, ironically, we're coming to the end of McFarlane's line, it seems, because Mattel's getting the license back in 2026. So everything new is old again. But this is just, it's cool. I like the sculpt on it. If the articulation was a bit better, it would be a definitive Superman for sure. Now, the DC license was actually split in half. Mattel had a master license of both kid and adult toys. It was actually split so that Spin Master got the kids line. So McFarlane was all collector stuff, Spin Master was kids. They did a lot of these great 3.5-inch DC figures. Really fantastic. I have a couple of them. I don't have the Superman, that's why I'm not showing it, but they were really, really good. Kind of a bummer they sort of vanished. They didn't do as many characters as I hoped they would, but they were pretty awesome for the price they sold them at. So in 2021, Mafex provided our first comics-accurate, highly articulated Superman figure with the Hush Superman. Now, the Hush Superman is pretty cool. It looks awesome. I personally have the Return of Superman in the recovery suit because I am a big Death and Return of Superman fan, specifically Return of Superman, Reign of Superman era. And so I have this, and I have the other 4 Supermans. But we haven't gotten a mullet Superman in the classic costume, which is why I haven't picked it up. But Mafex, really great figures. They are expensive. They are, they come with a ton of accessories to kind of make up for it. But they are very expensive figures. But I think the body molds are great, and they're really fun. It's nice having comic-styled figures that are super articulated, because a lot of what we get in super articulated stuff for both DC and Marvel is based on movies or games or something like that. So it was nice to get like comic figures, and it's nice that Mafex has kept it up. But yeah, really cool, solid stuff for the most part. And they've done a ton of Supermans for both movies, TV, and comics, but I thought it was significant that there was a comic-based Superman with the Hush version, and my personal pick, of course, being the recovery suit. And now that brings us to 2025 with the movie Superman for the new Superman movie. So we got 2 different versions here. I got the Spin Master and the McFarlane. I'm collecting the Spin Master line for this movie because they actually have Hawkgirl and Guy Gardner in it, and Mr. Terrific is in a chase figure, and there's figures like Engineer, and there's other stuff that's not in the McFarlane line. And I also do kind of like the smaller size because, I talked about it in a YouTube short. Kind of reminds me of the old DC Classic size, which is kind of fun that they're kind of going to a more 6-inch size figure, which I do like. I do like that little bit smaller scale. But yeah, I mean, this Spin Master Superman's pretty good. I think the likeness is pretty great. I think the cloth cape's pretty awesome. Really do like it. And then on the flip side, we do have the McFarlane one. I did get the deluxe edition that comes with Crypto, because I mean, if there's an option to get Crypto, I'm getting Crypto. Look at him, he's cute. But yeah, the Superman himself, I think is pretty solid as well. I think the likeness is pretty good. It's on par, I think, with the Spin Master. I feel like this one maybe have a little bit more realistic with skin tone, and the twirl in the hair is a separate piece, but I think overall, like, they have about the same likeness quality. This one's, there's a little bit better. He's also like 3 times the cost. This guy's like $10. Some places 8, but this guy's like 30. And overall, I mean, he's pretty nice. I think the cape looks pretty good as well with the wire in it. Only bummer is he only comes with 1 fist and then 1 open hand and then 2 like flying hands and some extra faces that all kind of look the same. But this is pretty nice for, kind of you have your 2 different versions depending on what scale you like, depending on what style you like. I'm kind of like, I'm partial to the Spin Masters, not just because of price, but just the simplicity. There's some joy in simplicity with it. But also just because there's other characters. But I think both are pretty solid overall. I will also say that there is other ones coming out. There's a Figuart Superman. There's all kinds of stuff for this movie. These are not the only ones. But I think it's kind of nice to see kind of the dichotomy there. The one benefit, too, with having Superman as you can have him with Superman. Yeah, look at that. We got David Cornsweet, we got Christopher Reeve. So it's kind of neat. They're in the same scale. That's kind of the reason I wanted to get at least Superman from the McFarlane line, because he kind of goes with the other 7-inch lines based on movies, whereas this Superman for Spin Master goes with the other Spin Master figures for his movie. And that, I think, is a pretty good overview of the evolution of Superman action figures. So that was the overall evolution of Superman action figures from 1978 to today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe and notification bell if you haven't already. Go check out the shorts for Mr. Terrific and Metamorpho and Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl when you can. Really would love to see everyone enjoy all the videos on the channel. Also, be sure to continue the conversation in our Discord server down below. Join through the link. You can also become a channel member and get perks like early access to videos, member exclusive live streams, and more. Let's give some special shout-outs to our channel members. Special shout-out to our channel member Captain Tiers, Spin-54, MasterBen95, Forever1000, Super Shaddix Boom, Mr. Smelly Potato, Jamie's World, Jamie Harper, Mars the Star Droid, Patty, Common Spidey, Liam Peterson, Common Jojo, Mohammed Diop, Josh Frisch, K-Floss, Gokai Gamer, Michael, Koopaman, Doge9789, LFIV, and Match's Dent. Thank you to members and viewers alike for your support of this channel. If you so wish, you can find me on social media on Blue Sky and Letterboxd at Soundout12. You can also find my awesome graphic designer on social media and Discord at DarkClaw643. And you can find Hero Club at hero-club.com for entertainment news, interviews, and more. And until next time, this is Soundout saying, up, up, and away!